All right, so we're gonna go ahead here and get started. So today we're gonna start getting into the obstacles, and we're gonna start with topography, which is, I would say, one of the harder ones.
But everything else, yes.
Sorry if I muted a few people by mistake. All right. All right, so we are gonna go through topography. Topography is one of the, we do everything we can to make this as objective as possible, but part of the topography application is a little subjective. So we'll talk about that. I'm sure there'll be questions about that. But I think overall, when we look at these obstacles, the high majority of them are very objective and are based on distances that can be easily measured or estimated. So I think the biggest thing with topography is to, at least what we see or I see in the captaincy, is that we need to keep in mind that we're evaluating two different things. We're evaluating not only the level of the lie and the shot that the golfer has, but we're also looking at elevation from the approach shot to the green. So a lot of times we see on Form 1s numbers that just are not possible because we're not looking at both of those factors. And so overall, we're looking at the evaluation of the terrain, and then we're looking at the slopes and mounds in the fairway landing zones and how they affect the stance or lie, and then if the shot is uphill or downhill, and the shot to the green is uphill or downhill. Keep that in mind. It's approach shots that we're dealing with here for topography when we're talking about uphill, downhill. All right, slopes, hills, mounds, or stance problems in the rough bordering the landing zones and around the green are taken into account by the recoverability in rough or R&R rating, not topography. On a one-shot hole, or a par 3, on our chart, there's a column that we use, and the topography is based solely on the elevation difference between the tee and the green for those holes. However, if you do have a par 3 where the bogey player cannot reach the hole, topography must be rated as a 2-shot hole. Okay, so if we look here at the chart,
thanks. Sorry.
We look at the chart here really quick, you can see that we've got that when they talk about that par 3 column, that's the par 3 column we're talking about, and then all the other ones are 2-shot or more holes. Okay, and then same thing for 3-shot holes. We're going to use these last 5 boxes here or lines on the chart, but we have to consider that we're looking at a couple things a little differently because we have multiple landing zones. So for shots from landing zone to landing zone, we use the top almost always or almost level with the fairway row and rate topography based on stance or lie difficulty only. And we rate the approach shot to the green based on the stance or lie in that landing zone and the elevation change from that landing zone to the green. And then we rate each of the individual landing zones and use the highest rating. And so keep in mind that when you're going from landing zone to landing zone, that you're only looking at the stance or lie difficulty. You're not looking at elevation in that instance. Okay, so again, we have our chart here, and we have to keep in mind again that we're looking at 2 factors. We're looking at the change in elevation from approach shot to landing zone, or approach shot landing zone to green, and the stance or the lie in the landing zone. Okay, the elevation, when we on our Form 1, you'll see that we do provide a elevation number. here. But this elevation is tee to green. So keep that in mind that on a par 3, that because it's tee to green, that number is already measured for you. So we know exactly what it is. On par 4s and par 5s or 2-shot holes, that's probably a better way to say it, on 2-shot holes or two or more shot holes, that elevation to the green may need to be estimated based on the numbers that you're given. There's other tools that you can use. You can use rangefinders if they have slope. That helps. There's also some guidelines in the guide as well that talk about some things to possibly use. Buildings, if there's buildings nearby or houses, you can use kind of a level as a level of 10 feet as a way. But again, the big thing, and then we do have, sometimes we will have some measurements that the captains will gather ahead of time. It's not common, but sometimes you'll have that, and you can use that to estimate as well. But that landing zone to the green, in a lot of cases, is estimated, and it's not super challenging to estimate it. And I guess the thing that I would say is that when we are estimating, it's always best that we're making sure we're balancing out between holes, and that if we're not 100% sure on one, we might wait and toggle it and then go up on the next one. But we want to make sure that our estimates, that whatever we come up with, we're hitting in these columns here and in these rows when we're talking about the approach shot elevation. So again, here, if you see, it's based on 10. So every 10 feet is going to be a new column. So for example, we're just gonna do a quick example here really quick to just go over a basic par 3 hole. So par 3 hole, we're in this first column here, and we have the number already for us. So number 3 here. So we're minus 30. Okay, so minus 30, we go to our chart on a par 3 is going to be a 3. So our topography number is a 3. Okay, that's very basic. We'll do another example here on a 2-shot hole, but that's just a very basic where you use this elevation number for a par 3 and then go to your chart on a par 3 hole and get the number. That's the simplest elevation, or the simplest application of topography. Because again, because it's a par 3, we're not worrying about the stance because the tee box is in theory flat. I know we run into some that aren't, but we're assuming that they're flat. Okay, so when we start getting into these other choices, minor problem, minor to moderate, moderately awkward, significantly awkward, or extremely awkward, now we're talking about 2 or 3 shot holes. Okay, so there's some guidelines here that say follow these guidelines when evaluating stance and or lie. So we use a minor problem even if the fairway is level. So what that is saying is that instead of them adding another column here that says level or no problem and putting the same exact numbers as minor problem, they're just saying when it is level to use this same column for your result. And then the other 4 columns, if the fairway terrain makes stance or lie increasingly more difficult. So as we move throughout the going across the what's the best way to say this, the kind of range, we're just progressing upward as we move on. And so there's a lot of questions or thoughts that go into how to do that, and unfortunately there's not really clear guidance on this, but one of the things they do say is that we should consider the nature of the shot being played. An uphill lie to an elevated target is much easier than a downhill lie to the same target. And I think that is one thing to help. And then the other thing we have to keep in mind too is that, again, because this system is used across the world, and across the country, we have to keep, our relative place in topography and, keep that in the back of our mind as well. And so when we're talking about if you've played in other places, other places may or may not be more or less level or have more fairway tilts and things like that. So we have to keep that really in the back of our mind as well. And then the other thing to keep in mind too, that is there's a good example on page 8 in your course rating guide, and I'll just read it here. But it talks about a situation where we're using weighting in percentage, and it says here for example, if 3/4 of the fairway landing zone has minor stance problems with the green 10 feet uphill, which is rated a 2, and 1/4 of the fairway landing zone has a significantly awkward stance problems with the green 20 feet uphill, rated 6, a rating of 3 would be appropriate. So basically, we're looking at an average of the conditions throughout the landing zone. We're not necessarily looking at the most penal part of the landing zone. We're looking at the average spot, or the average stance and lie throughout that landing zone. Yep, and then there was some good comments in here too, in that if it's less, that's a good, Mike, that's a great comment. If it's less than 10, that's an important note to say. If the elevation is less than 10, then we're in this almost level. So, you might have some elevation where it's 8, 7 feet uphill, but it has to be greater than 10 to get into the column.
Hey, Kyle.
Yeah.
What is the technique you use, especially from landing area to landing area on a par 5, to measure elevation change? 2 measurers, 2 spotters measuring from eyeball to eyeball, or what's your technique?
So we don't necessarily measure elevation from landing zone to landing zone, but if we're going from landing zone to the green and it's not a par 3 hole, then we would measure that. And in that case, I typically use my slope that I have on my rangefinder, but you can also use other things like the height of the trees to gauge it, if there's any buildings nearby. Sometimes you'll have that information provided. Some captains gather that. It's not common, but those are kind of things. And really, when we're getting to that point where we're making an estimate, we just need to be in the right ballpark, right? I mean, we need to, if it's 20, if it's 23 or 19, as you can see, like the number is still the same. So we just need to be in the right ballpark when we're making that estimate.
We did have a question come in the chat as well.
So what is the thought behind having it as a minor problem on holes other than par 3s for level? So what is the thought behind having it as a minor problem on holes other than par 3s for level fairways? I'm not quite sure. So what the question's asking here. So let me maybe this will help answer it. So and this is, and I'll ask other people to kind of share some of the things that they use. But for me, this is how I evaluate stance and lie. So I start at a basis point of looking, again, I'm looking at the average stance and lie throughout the landing zone that I'm looking at. And for me, it's if I were to take my stance and hit that shot, if I don't think about changing my ball position, changing my aim, that to me is a minor problem. when I start thinking about changing those things, if I have to change where I aim, if I have to put the ball farther up in my stance or farther back in my stance, I have to grip down on the club. That's when I start moving across into minor, moderate, moderate, awkward, etc. So that's kind of my starting point, what I use. And like I said, there's not any great guidance from the USGA on that, but that's typically what I use as a starting point. And I'll open it up to any of the other experienced people that want to share, their thoughts on how they do it.
Hey Kyle, it's Al here. I understood that comment to be what's the difference between the par 3 hole and a minor problem. And if that's the correct interpretation, my assessment is on a par 3, you're teeing off, you can elevate the ball, you're teeing off from a very good surface, and that's the baseline. When you get on the fairway, you're always, the chances of being a perfect lie are pretty nil. You might be in a divot, you might have a little bit of a thing. So to account for the difference between hitting a shot from the fairway versus hitting one from the tee box, and that's how I see the difference between the par 3 column and the fairway minor problem column.
Yeah, that's right, Al. That's a great way to say it. I mean, basically, we're just taking stance and lie out of it completely on a par 3 because we're assuming a flat lie on the tee and a perfect lie on the tee. Yep.
An additional comment that might help is that when we look at obstacles from a rating perspective, if an obstacle exists at any point in time, there should be some form of rating in the form.
Turn this joker off. Oh, can you hear me all right?
Everybody can hear me, right?
Yep.
Okay. There was somebody else talking, I'm not sure.
I just muted.
So obstacles that exist should have a rating. And if a ball is lying in the fairway, there is an obstacle there in terms of lie. I think on page 5 of the manual, it does talk, and this relates to laterals, but it talks to an approach that, hey, if an obstacle exists, there should be a minimum rating of 1. So kind of to supplement what Al had mentioned, anytime we have an obstacle that exists, there's got to be a minimum rating that's something higher than 0.
Yep.
Kyle, I try not to jump in, but Mike Brady's verbalizing it correctly on the chats. You all need to look at what the chats say. Once you leave the teeing ground, it automatically becomes a 1. And from there, it goes on up depending on stance and lie.
Right.
Yep, that's kind of probably a cleaner way of saying that what I was saying. On a par 3, it never exists in the fairway, theoretically.
So just to verify, I mean, topo, I always thought had to do with the fairway. And so we wouldn't even take into account the tee pad. I mean, because there are oftentimes crooked tee pads that are unlevel and bumpy and stuff, but I've never taken that into account because I've always thought topo was just for the fairway.
Yeah, and that's so that is correct in the sense that we don't take into account the level of the tee. We do, so topography includes the stance and elevation, but on par 3s it's very simple. We're just looking at elevation, we're not looking at stance. So exactly what you're talking about, Lori.
Okay, just want to make sure.
Yep. So I think I just want to go through some examples, and if anyone wants to jump in, they can do that as well. But I think one of the things that Mark Bultema has been a proponent of is making sure that we're noting properly on our Form 1 both of these things. And I think it's important that we do put that on there so that we're making sure that we're looking at both, because I can tell you that mean, a ton of people do not look at both. So when we're writing our things on our topography chart here, there's a line here for elevation change, stance, or lie. So if we're on our first hole and we're to our approach shot area of 83 yards here, and we look at our elevation of the green, let's say we're downhill 160 feet here. So chances are we probably are downhill at some point in time in our approach shot. Can't be certain, but let's just say, for example, that we're at -20. So we would write -20 in here, or 20. You don't know, I guess minus isn't really important. And then they're usually put like a slash or a line, and then we'd write down what our what our evaluation of the stance and lie would be. So if we say it's a minor problem, so MP, and I apologize for my writing, you'll be able to do better when you have a pencil. But if you put 20/MP, then that's basically a code for if we come back to our chart, it's in this 20 column and it's a minor problem. So 20 and a minor problem is a 3. So we go back to our form 1, and then we'd have a 3 here for our topography. And just like we do everything else, we look at both the landing zone for the scratch player on the left and the bogey player on the right. So they're going to be different. And you know, sometimes it might be the exact same. You have a very flat hole that it's flat the entire way, and you know, it's just a pancake. It's going to be the same regardless, right? But in a lot of cases, you have dog legs or things that cause the landing zones to be different. So you're going to look at it from landing zone to landing zone. The other thing to think about too is that on this, like for example, on this hole, it's a par 5, so we have a 3-shot hole. So we're also going to be looking at our stance and elevation, just our stance and elevation when we go from landing zone to landing zone. So if we ever had a stance or elevation in our example here that was a 4 or higher, then we wouldn't use this 3, we would use the 4. Okay, but on most holes, on par 4s, which are the majority of golf holes, you're only going to be looking at one landing zone. And so you're going to have one topography look in terms of the landing zone and the stance and lie there, and then the elevation from the landing zone to the green. All right, so any questions or comments before we move on? Okay. All right, so fairway is our next one here, our next obstacle. So fairway, we're looking at an elevation of an evaluation of the difficulty of keeping the ball in the fairway from tee to green. Fairway ratings are based on fairway widths in all landing zones, hole length, nearby trees, obstacles, and punitive rough. Okay, when we're measuring fairways, we take the average width on our contour cut fairways. And when the fairway width is reduced by a punitive obstacle, again, the punitive definition is an obstacle or situation that is unusually difficult, often requiring a demanding recovery shot or likely to cost the player a stroke. And we average it, in this case, by a punitive obstacle. We average it if it's at the end of the landing zone, or we use the narrow width if it's at the beginning of the landing zone. So this doesn't come up a ton, but one way to think about it is that if you have a really tight landing zone, and you've got an obstacle that's nearby the front of it, then you're going to use that narrow width and not the average. But in most cases, we're going to use the average. So I think I have a picture here. So you have this contoured fairway here where it's not perfectly cut, but you can see it's a little wider when we get up here. It's a little narrower here. So in this case, we're just going to use an average. So, I mean, that could be measured. It looks like the average is roughly, right around this line here, from here to here, and you would average it there. So even if your number on your sheet says 150, and 150 is right here, remember our landing zone is 20 yards ahead and 20 yards, or sorry, our landing zone is 20 yards back, or where we're looking at, because that's where the ball hits the ground and rolls out. So we're looking, again, we would just take an average in this case if it's contoured like this. Okay, and then if we do have this happens quite a bit. If we have like an intermediate cut of rough, then basically we're going to count half of it. So the easiest way to do that is just to stand on either the edge of the fairway and shoot to the deep rough, or stand on the deep rough and shoot to the edge of the fairway, and that will include that intermediate cut, half of it. If that doesn't make any sense, it'll make a lot of sense, and it's really simple to understand once you're out there on the course. Bless you. All right, and then we talked about this, I think, last week. Fairway ratings are not applicable on par 3 holes, even for a bogey player who cannot reach the green. Okay, so we'll go through an example here. We've got our fairway rating chart here, and we're going to look at the width of the fairway. That's the first thing we need to get. So we, again, gather that by going, we typically will stand on one edge of the fairway and shoot to the other edge of the fairway with our rangefinder. Get that number. Again, we're taking the average of the landing zone to get that number. And then we're going to use that number and then the length of the hole to determine our rating. So we'll go back to our form 1 here, do a few examples. Oh, there's maybe a question that came in. Okay, so if we have a fairway width, let's say here on the par 4, our fairway width, we measure it in landing zone 1. So we're going to write it in here is 32. Oh, and my writing is not on today. And then this one is 27. Okay, so then we're going to go to our chart. Keep in mind here, we got a 350-yard hole. So 350 yards to a 32 is going to be a 3. Okay, so because we're doing men here. So men, 350 is going to be a 3. And then a 27 is also going to be a 3. Okay, so that would be our number. And then if we have any adjustments, which we'll talk about in a minute, then we would make those. And then if we're doing a women's tee, then we would start on the right here. So men and women in the same table, but if it's women, we'd start on the right. So our number is going to be 3, 3 if we're assuming that we don't have any adjustments. And we'll talk about adjustments now. Okay. So then we have these adjustments. So this is the first obstacle in the topography obstacle. We didn't have any adjustments. Okay, but now we have these adjustments in fairway. So we talked about some of these before. We've talked about the layup, or the L minus, when we were talking about dog legs and layup. We also have a visibility, or a visible adjustment, a V. And that is if none of the landing zone is visible and it's difficult to determine the line of play. So the easiest way that I've been taught to deal with this situation is if you go to your landing zone and you look back at the tee and you can't see where you teed off, then you're going to have a visibility potential adjustment. The only thing that I would say that might not be the case is that if you have a tree lined hole where the tree line is consistent down the entire length of the hole, you know which way it's going. But let's say that there's not a ton of trees and there's a hill, and then when you go up over the hill, you have no idea where, if you're supposed to go right or left. That's when we would have a V adjustment for our fairway. And before I talk about W adjustments, there's a note here at the bottom of the table. It says if the fairway is less than 20 yards wide, a W plus adjustment cannot be applied. So just keep that in mind when we're talking about W pluses. If it's less than 20, you cannot have a W plus. So a W plus would come into play if the fairway width is effectively reduced by a dog leg. If there's overhanging tree branches in the landing zone, that's very common, especially at a lot of the courses that we go to that are a little that are narrow and short. They typically do have a lot of trees that are close to the edges of the fairway. We also look at the contour of the tilt so that the shot must be played to one side, or severe obstacles, dense trees, penalty area, out of bounds that closely border the fairway landing zone. Okay, so typically a W plus adjustment, we're typically doing that because of either overhanging tree branches, or we have contour that tilts the fairway that effectively makes it shorter. So you might have a fairway that's tilted like such, and I mean, yeah, your fairway, when you measure it, might be from here to here, but when you hit it here, it goes here. And when you hit it here, it goes here. So your effective length is actually less, which is why you're doing a plus adjustment here, because we're making the number higher. And then if the fairway width is effectively reduced when a majority of the fairway landing zone is tilted and balls are likely to end up in the rough, then we'll have a +2 adjustment. There's not a ton of courses that have this, but there are some. And that's where we deal with a fairly significant tilt there. Okay. So in terms of, I think there was a question about a completed Form 1. We'll definitely send one over to people, put one on the website. It's on our list of things to get done for sure. So that's a great comment there. Also with the fairway adjustments, you have the W plus, but we also have a W minus as well. And so these are going to be used in a couple of situations. One where the width is effectively increased by hillsides, a mounding that closely borders the fairway, and the balls will bounce back. So I'm sure some of you have played these courses where they have the fairways and there's these big mounds that basically if you hit it somewhere up in the mound, it's going to kick down towards the fairway. So basically we would do a W minus in those cases because our fairway width is effectively widened. There's also some scenarios where playing the ball or where shots can be hit from the rough on one side as easily from those from the fairway. You'll see this a lot on golf courses where the rough is not very thick, and that we definitely want to use this. But keep in mind when you're using this part of the W minus, and it could be a 1 or 2 based on how many sides of the hole can be easily played. But you have to keep in mind that what easily played means, or what it's trying to get at. If you have, trees and things that make it challenging or potentially not easy to play, you shouldn't be doing W minuses in those cases. You really have to limit it to those spots where there's not much interference from anything else left or right, and playing, if you were to hit it in the rough, it wouldn't be that much more of a difficult shot. And a lot of times, probably the most common example of this W minus or -2 is when we have a bogey player that can't reach a fairway, and we typically do have a W2 minus adjustment, because in that scenario the book tells us to use this less than 20, but then typically apply a -2 adjustment if we can play easily from the left and the right in those areas. And then our last adjustment is the unpleasant one, which talks about poor turf conditions. We really never use this. Again, I think Mark Bolton's made the comment before, and that we're rating these golf courses for 10 years, and one time that we're out there is not going to be indicative of 10 years worth of playing. So we very, very rarely do anything with unpleasant. And again, so I would recommend to really never use that unless the leader of the team tells you to use it. All right, so let's, if we talk about some adjustments, just looking at the Form 1 here. When we have an adjustment in the fairway here, we have a line for the adjustments, and we have what they are. And then we just write those in this column here. So if we had a W minus adjustment here, we would just write W minus here. And then that would allow us to remember that. Now, in some cases, you have holes where you're going to have multiple landing zones. So in those cases, I like to put the adjustments close to where I put the number. So if I measure the width of my landing zone on the par 5 here as 33, I'm going to write 33, and then I'm going to write my W plus adjustment right there, so I remember that it applies to this one. Because when we're talking about our landing zone and getting our fairway number, again, like we do in a lot of situations, we do in a lot of situations where we are looking at multiple landing zones. We're going to take the higher number. So on a par 5, if I have 33 and the W plus here, but then I have on my next landing zone, it's 25. Let's say 22, because I think that's going to be for sure level. So we have a 33 and a W plus and a 22. So if we go to our chart, again, 553. So if we're at 553, that's the last column here, and we're at a 33, which is a 4, plus a W plus gets us to a 5. But then a 22 in our second landing zone gets us to 20 and 24 here, and then 553, and that gets us to a 7. So we have a value of a 7 and a 5. In that case, we're going to just take the higher value. So at the end of the day, our number here that we write on the sheet is going to be 7. All right. Any questions on that?
I have a comment regarding the visibility. It's happened to me last year. Where I forget what course we were rating, but I could not see the landing zone. And one of the other raters said, "Oh, I played this course before, it's not a problem." I think if you've played the course before, you could fall into that trap of not noticing that you should do a V because you know where to play it, but a new player would notice that. So for those of you that have played the courses before, pretend that you haven't played it, and see how someone who hasn't played the course would react to that situation.
I'd like to make a comment. This is Bob Carter. I can only recall one hole in my entire career where I could not determine where the fairway was. It's at Kapalua, number 4. The fairway starts after the crest of the hill, so you have no clue, and it's wide open up there. I personally think V's on fairways should rarely be used, because usually in Michigan, we have some topography issue or tree issue that lets us know where to hit it. So I would be in, it's kind of like a U on the fairway. I'm not sure we should use that very much. End of comment.
So Bob, I agree with you. This is Mark. There are some places in Michigan, for instance, we had one at American Dunes last fall, the 11th hole, where all the teeing grounds were set up at an elevation, 50, 60, 70 yards from the tees was a mound, and there were no trees lining the fairway. None of us had played the course before. So we didn't know whether it was doglegging right or left. So I think it's fair to say that you have to match both parts of that sentence. A, you can't see the landing zone, and B, especially, and you can't determine the line of play. Well, on that 11th hole at American Dunes, we couldn't determine the line of play from the teeing grounds, so we used a V adjustment there.
Yep, agree with all those comments in terms of it. It is very rarely used because, and like in
Mike Brady says we rated for a first-time player.
What was said was that the trees a lot of times guide us and get us in the right direction. So yeah, definitely be judicious with that adjustment. All right.
Mike Brady's asking if are we grading for a first-time player or a regular player in terms of it's interesting.
That's a good. So Mark Erickson, you're not on mute, but I'm glad that you read the chat because I didn't read it yet. So yeah, that is a good question. I don't know if I necessarily have the right answer for that. I think some of it is going to be, I don't know. I'll have to look more into it. I don't want to say one thing or not. My guess is that we're probably rating it for an average, and someone that maybe does play it and other people that don't, but I'll write that one down and get back to you guys on that, unless anyone else knows for sure. All right, we'll move on to green target here. So green target is an evaluation of the difficulty of hitting the green with the approach shot. And our ratings are based on the green size, the approach shot length, and green surface visibility and firmness. When we talk, we'll talk a little bit about firmness, and that's typically not something that we really get into a ton here in Michigan. And then there's also a way to deal with what the book defines as a transition zone. We're going to talk about transition zone at a later time, but so we'll probably just table that discussion for now. But when we do talk about transition zone, we'll definitely talk about its impact on green target and how we use that and get to that number in the chart. And then let's see, and then here. So let's go to our chart. So looking at our chart for green target here, then we're looking at our shot lengths. So you can see those down the sides of the page. So in here, this is an example of a chart that we have a different one for women versus men. So the women is in gold, the men is in blue. And we have our scratch listed on the left and our bogey listed on the right. And these yardage shots are our approach shot length, or our shot length into the green. Okay, so that's the first thing we'll figure out. And then we also need to use our effective green diameter. Okay, that effective green diameter is going to be measured by the measuring team and will be on your Form 1. And on our Form 1, thanks to some good programming from one of our raters, Steve Stellini, we have a standard green target that's provided to you. So our green target's in this section here. So based on the approach shot length, if there's no adjustments that need to be made, then we would have our standard value, and we can typically just drop that right down. So if we don't have any adjustments, we just drop this 4 right down here, this 6 straight down here. But if we needed to figure it out, or like we were talking about for layups where we had the different adjustments, what we do is we'd use this 100 for our approach shot, and then our effective green diameter, which is up here at the top, which in this case is 22. So if we go to a 22 with from 100 yards for, and on the left, a scratch player. So then we're doing the blue, scratch player is 100 yards, and then 22 is 4. And so our value of 4 is but again, that's going to already be on here. But if you do make any adjustments, you want to make sure and get those adjusted. So if there's if you have to lay up, if the approach shot distance is adjusted at all, you want to make sure that it's still correct. Okay, and then we do have some adjustments here for our green target. We have a visibility or a B adjustment. This visibility adjustment is definitely more commonly used than the fairway one. And basically we have a couple levels. We have a +1 and a +2. +1 is if less than half of the green surface is visible. And then +2 is if the green is completely blind. And then it gives you an example, the flagstick is not visible. So I'm sure that most of us have played courses where we have situations like that, where it's a blind shot. Again, we have to also keep in mind that if we have certain places where maybe part of the green would be blind, I think of an example at like TPC Michigan, for those of you that have played there on hole 13, if you tuck the hole location in the very, very back left, in some spots you might not be able to see the flag from there. But on average, if the flag is put on average spots, you're going to be able to see it. So that would be a scenario where you would not have a visibility adjustment. But if you do have a visibility adjustment, you're going to mark that down with a V and then a +1 or +2 based on the conditions that are met. Another tip to keep in mind too, especially if you're not of average height or close to average height, check with people that are of average height. So that works for both people that are really tall and those that are smaller. And then the other thing too that was pointed out to me this year that I thought was a great point was that if you're a male and you're rating female tees, make sure you squat down a little bit when you're looking to see if the green is visible or not, because if you're 6'4", you're not looking at the average length or the average eye line of a female golfer. So just keep that in mind for those of you that have been doing this. The other adjustment here is another adjustment is obstructed, or an O, and that's if the approach shot to the green is obstructed by a tree in front of or overhanging the green. And then we also have a tiered adjustment. In this tiered green, we talked about that definition earlier this year, but that will be identified typically on your Form 1, but you do need to remember to make sure to put it in your green target as well. And then, like I talked about earlier, firmness, we very rarely use these. Again, we're really trying to make sure this is good for 10 years, and one visit for us is not indicative of a 10-year playing window. So unless there's something that would allow us to consider doing this, we're very rarely going to use this. And I can't remember of all of the ones I've been on the last three plus years, I can't remember doing that once. So I'm sure there's some scenarios where we did do it. I think maybe the new course, our Arcadia Bluffs, maybe I remember that one. But very rarely is that applied.
A comment
Yep.
from Bob Carter. New courses have to be rated again in 3 years. So I agree with you. Arcadia South, they were very firm. So I think it would be appropriate to maybe use an F when the course opens up. When you go back in 3 years, you might want to eliminate that once they mature and get softer.
Right. Yep. Yeah. A new course gets rated it has to be rated at least every 5 years, but typically we try to do it within 3. But yeah, you're right. I mean, that's a good example of what you might do in that case.
One more comment about visibility.
Mm-hmm.
In my experience, even experienced raters, one of the reasons they go backward on a hole is to check for visibility. It's probably the most overlooked, often forgotten thing to do.
Yeah.
And every landing area is different. So one person could have a V plus and the other person not have a V plus.
Yep. No, I agree. I know I've gone back countless times to because you get up to the green, you're like, oh crap, I didn't even look at it. So. All right, and then we did have this year we did have some, while we're talking about green target, we did have some discussion about this obstruction and kind of how that is applied. I did reach out to the USGA and got an answer that's somewhat good. Personally, I'd like to see these things written down somewhere, like in the manual, instead of relying on the staff people at the USGA. But here's the question. Basically there was some discussion about what this term "in front of" means, and that we have a tree that's 150 yards out in the fairway. Could that provide a no adjustment for the green target, in addition to the landing zone, which we'll cover in trees? But here's the response from them, and basically what they're saying is that 99 times out of 100, that 150-yard tree would not be applied as in front of the green, but would definitely be a landing zone obstruction. And then they say, generally speaking in quote unquote generalities, green target trees normally would be within 50 yards of the front of the green. So hopefully they'll get that in the manual, and they update it, but that's kind of the guidance that we have that we'll use going forward in 2021 on that.
Kyle, I like the fact that they've given us some direction on that 50 yards in front of the green. But in this scenario here, where a bogey player's got a 150-yard approach shot, and that's where his landing zone initiates for his green target application, got a scratch player behind him that may have a 200-yard approach shot, and that tree at 150 may certainly be an obstruction to his approach shot. So I'd hate to just use every letter of what they've said here and apply it with the 50-yard minimum, because there could be obstructions for players with long approach shots that are not at specifically within 50 yards of the front of the green.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, I think it's more, again, it's just kind of like this generality. I mean, hopefully they'll be able to provide us more, but I mean, that's a good example that you bring up there in terms of that. So. All right. So I think we'll go ahead and I guess let me just see if there's anything else was there any questions about green target?
Kyle, this is Howard.
Yeah.
I've got a question. How
Sure.
does a false front affect the green target rating?
Yep, so that's a good question. So when our team is measuring the effective green diameter, we take into account false fronts. So that false front is not included in the depth measurement of the green. So basically, we're just assuming that that's not part of the green when we measure. And typically, how we do that is that we just find the spot where a ball is dropped and it stays in place and doesn't roll off the front. But all that's done by the measuring team. All right, so we won't get into R&R and bunkers, but one thing to point out, and I think a lot of you guys know from doing this, but this green target number on our Form 1 serves as the basis or starting point for our R&R and our bunkers. So when we talk about R&R and bunkers next week, our starting point when we go to our tables is going to be this green target number that we have for both our scratch and our bogey player. So it's really important that we get this right and that this number is correct because it does impact our R&R and our bunker numbers.
Kyle, quick question. Did you say you were going to contact the USGA in response to the question that Mike had, which I thought was a very good question, in terms of when you're looking at stuff, are you looking at somebody who's never seen it before, or you're looking at the person that plays there 3 times a week, who obviously would know the line of play and so forth? So I think it's an interesting question. Were you going to get an official response to that, or?
Yeah, I've got that to reach out to the USGA about.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Yep. And then there was a question about just what we're agreeing to. I think I'll reach back out to the USGA to get confirmation, and then use the example that Mark Boltema mentioned. But I think we'll have to wait and see until we get that. So John, I don't have a great answer to that question until I hear back from the USGA. So we'll have a couple things to report back on next week. All right. Well, I think we'll stop there. Appreciate everyone taking their time today. We'll definitely talk next week about R&R and bunkers, and we'll also report back on some of these things. And for the new people, I'll get a completed Form 1 and I'll scan that up and put it up on the volunteer website. I'll get that done by the end of the day today. So you can check there starting tomorrow morning, and for sure it'll be up there for you to look at.
Can I make one comment? Bob Carter again?
Sure, of course.
Getting back to the tree situation as an obstruct,
Yep.
I think if you use the tree to W plus the fairway, you shouldn't double dip and use it as an O for the green target. What do other people think?
That's
I can, yeah, go ahead. I can relate to that. I mean, I wish I could point you to the right page, but it indicates that it can't be used. A tree that's used for a shoot or a W plus can't be used as an obstruction. So they actually use the word either may not or something like that, but you don't double dip in a situation like that with trees. You may not do that.
Yeah, Mike Brady says page 35 is where that's listed. All right, well, we'll stay on. I'll stay on. If there's any other questions, if anyone wants to ask questions, feel free to do it. But we'll again appreciate it. We'll see you all next week.
Thank you, Kyle.
Yep.
Bye, Kyle. Thank you.
Don't know how to leave, but
Kyle, this is Mark. What a great piece of news on the ability to get measuring equipment at reduced rates. That's fantastic.
Yep. Yeah, no, that's I mean, hopefully some people will take advantage of it, and I think it's just another good reason to be a GAM course rater, right? So
there you go. Great idea. Can we, when we call you, can we use credit cards to do that, or is that checks only? What's your thought?
Yeah, credit card is good too.
What is that news?
So it was in the email. It's not, but we've partnered with Bushnell. So GAM course raters can get discounts on Bushnell devices if they want, and there's some pricing and everything in the email that was sent out a couple hours ago. But it's fairly, I mean, it's a fairly significant discount too. So
Hey, Kyle?
Yeah.
This is Peter Reed.
Yep.
Yeah, first, fantastic discount on Bushnell. Do we fill that form out and send it in to you?
Mm-hmm.
And then follow up with a check or call you with a credit card?
Correct, yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, will that be shipped then from Bushnell, or do you send it out from the GAM?
Yeah, so we have to, because of the deal or the way it's set up, is that we'll order it, it'll come to the GAM, and then we'll send it out to you.
Okay.
After. And so we're not going to be making a ton of these orders.
Right.
We're going to be making them. I think the first one we'll make is March 1st, and then we'll probably do it, monthly for the first couple months, and then after that, it'll be, very, very rare after, once we get going on the.
Right.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
Kyle and Theodore, a quick comment on this visibility thing. I know it comes up with some regularity. As a historic application, we've gone pretty much letter of the guide in that if you can't see the landing zone and you can't determine the line of play, mentally that presents difficulties, whether you've played the course before or not. I personally in our group has generally not used that as a criteria. It specifically has to do with the psychological aspect of being able to see your target, just like a green target application with a visibility. If you can't see that, the shot becomes more difficult. You don't have a good picture in your mind of the finish of where you want your ball to be. So when both of those situations come into play, you can't see it and you can't determine it, then we apply the V plus without regard of whether you play the course every day or never.
Yeah, you're right. I think because I mean, really, what we're talking about is, we're like the two things that we're talking about are things that can be measured, or not. I guess not measured, but they're yes or no questions, right? It's not that because I play here, I know that I have to hit on the left side or aim at that tree, and that gets me in the right spot. I mean, So I agree with that.
Again, Kyle, this is Mark. Another very well done session. I really appreciate the effort that you and Theodore are putting into these things. It's going to go a long way in helping folks get started this spring.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think hopefully it'll be great for them. So we got
Have a good day, Steve.
a lot of new people, so it's good.
Good. Huh? That's great to hear. I'll see you both later. Take
Sounds
care.
good.
Kyle, this is Joe Bolter. Good session. I had a question. We did have, I thought at the loop last year, we had a number of holes that we rated as firm. When a green target, when a green has so many undulations in it, and the pin placement has only a few spots where you could really keep the ball on the green. How do we rate that? Is it in under firmness or?
So I think sorry, or let me, can you say that again? I want to make sure I get, so are you saying that like for if it's a narrow portion of the green, and
Well, I can remember after we rated the loop, and I don't remember, I think we did red, but anyways, but then we went and played it, and there were a number of greens that were closely mown areas all around the green, and the green had a very small level area on the green surface where landing the ball there would keep you on the surface. But much of the rest of it was undulating enough that should you hit in those areas with the undulation, there was no chance you were going to stay on the green.
Kyle, if I can try to address that one.
Sure.
Page 37, green surface rating. That's where you start getting up into your moderately contoured and highly contoured, and we do run into greens where pin placements, the green may be large, but there's really only two places, or
Right.
one place for that matter, that's somewhat level. But that's where when the measurers go out there, you'll be getting into the other two columns. If that answers your question. Another thing is about the loop. You could hear the ball impact, and it sounded like a watermelon, so you know it was firm.
Yeah.
Those of us that are a little bit aged and our hearing is going, but the point being is that of all the courses I've done in the past 7 to 10 years, I don't know how long I've been doing this, but most greens and fairways are just normal impact. Except in the spring when I basically impact and then I go backwards with the ball spin or plug. But the point is that very rarely will you come into a course that I've seen in Michigan, and I've been all over Michigan.
Yeah.
Very rarely will you ever see a firm green. The loop is one of the exceptions, and I'll finish by muting.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, I think it just goes back whenever we're talking about firmness, whether it's it's really about the, like you said, that sound that the ball makes or the intent. And I think that, I mean, the loop is a unique golf course in that it's intended to play, not like a traditional United States golf course, but more, a links style golf course over in the UK. So yeah, we don't have a ton of those situations where we're dealing with firmness, but there are a couple.
Yeah, thanks, everybody. I got my memory refreshed from measuring versus rating, and that was helpful. Thanks.
Thanks, Joe.